everyone's talking about the arrest. Andrew Mountbatten, Windsor, taken in, questioned for hours, then released but still under investigation. That's the headline. But the real story isn't the police car moment you can picture in your head. It's the person who seemed to evaporate around the same time. Because while the cameras fixate on Andrew, the question being whispered is much simpler. Where is Sarah Ferguson? And more importantly, what is she doing right now that's making people call it a bonkers plot to make cash? In a minute, I'll walk you through why this arrest hits differently than the usual royal scandal cycle, how Royal Lodge quietly turned into a pressure cooker, and later in the video, we'll get into the detail that changes the entire mood, the paper trail that shows what money panic actually looks like when it's written down. Because if you think this is just Fergie hiding from the press, you're missing the sharper, colder reality. The arrest itself is extraordinary, yes, but it's also legally messy. Andrew was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. That phrase sounds antique, almost theatrical, and CNN points out it's a common law offense that's notoriously hard to define and prosecute. It's not just, did you behave badly? Prosecutors have to prove status, duty, a serious abuse of that duty, and intent without a reasonable excuse. So what does that mean in real life? It means the investigation can feel endless. It means people around him don't know what tomorrow looks like. And when you don't know what tomorrow looks like, people start making decisions that are about survival, not dignity. Now hold on to that. Because while the public watches the legal situation, the palace watches something else: money, housing, leverage. And that's where Royal Lodge stops being a nice-to-know detail and starts acting like a trap. Royal Lodge isn't just their home, it's a huge, expensive, hard-to-maintain statement of permanence. BBC reports that Andrew has been under pressure over the cost of running the property, and that an updated royal biography by Robert Hardman claims King Charles instructed an end to Andrew's personal allowance and security payments, costs believed to run into the millions. Buckingham Palace declined to comment on the claim, but the pressure point is obvious. And here's the part people skip. According to BBC, Andrew's lease runs until 2078. He paid large sums up front for renovations and arrangements that made sense long-term, but don't make it easy to just move out without losing out. So when funding tightens, the house isn't comfort. It's a liability you can't quietly escape, so put yourself in Sarah's position for a second. Most people would be thrilled to have a royal property anywhere near Windsor on their doorstep. But if that property becomes the centre of a financial standoff and your ex-husband is suddenly back in the most damaging headlines, then your proximity isn't a privilege, it's a magnet. And Sarah Ferguson knows what it feels like when the world decides you're the punchline. Except this time, she's dealing with something else too: her health. In early 2024, Reuters reported that Sarah said she was in shock after being diagnosed with malignant melanoma, following earlier treatment for breast cancer. She spoke publicly about being grateful for support and urged people to be diligent about checking for signs of melanoma. That matters because it changes the emotional texture of this story. When someone is physically vulnerable, reputational pressure doesn't just sting, it can feel like a threat. And it also changes what making money can look like, because the usual options get narrower. But then the Epstein files re-entered the conversation, and that's when the tone turned icy again. Because the uncomfortable thing about this chapter isn't speculation, it's documentation. BBC reporting on newly released emails describes Sarah Ferguson asking Jeffrey Epstein for advice on dealing with significant debts, discussing bankruptcy options, and expressing exhaustion and demoralization. The reporting doesn't paint a glamorous picture. It paints a picture of someone overwhelmed and therefore vulnerable to anyone offering a lifeline. And BBC also points to a historical echo that's impossible to ignore: the 2010 Cash for Access scandal, when Ferguson was secretly filmed appearing to offer access to Andrew for money, an earlier moment where cash need and status collided in a humiliating way. So when people now describe a bonkers plot to make cash, the reason it catches fire is because there's a pattern. Crisis hits, money becomes urgent, public shame follows, and then comes the reinvention attempt, which brings us to the most gossiped about part of this story: Sarah's whereabouts. Here's what we can say without turning this into fan fiction. People magazine reported that Sarah Ferguson reportedly checked into Paracelsus Recovery, a luxury clinic in Zurich, after Christmas and stayed through late January, citing a Daily Mail report. People noted it could not independently confirm the Daily Mail's claims, and that the clinic itself would not confirm or deny whether any individual was in its care. People also said that following Andrew's arrest, her current whereabouts were unknown. So yes, there are reports of a retreat, but even more telling is the messaging around it. When someone wants to disappear, they disappear quietly. When someone wants to disappear and control the narrative, you get carefully worded non-confirmations and a fog of unknown whereabouts. And that's why this doesn't feel like a simple hideout. It feels like preparation. Because any comeback costs money. New advisors, new PR, new deals. A new angle that lets the public talk about anything other than Andrew Epstein and old emails. And if Royal Lodge is turning into a financial and reputational war zone, then Sarah has a choice to make that is both personal and strategic. Does she stay emotionally loyal to Andrew in public standing beside the man who keeps pulling her name back into the undertow? Or does she do the thing she's hinted at in different ways over the years? Separate the brands. Not separate the marriage. That happened long ago. Separate the reputation. Now, there's another layer people don't always want to say out loud. The palace doesn't need to publicly attack Sarah Ferguson. It doesn't have to. It can simply stop extending warmth. And in royal life, warmth is access. BBC describes Andrew as having stepped down as a working royal, losing roles and titles, and withdrawing into private life, essentially de-royaled. That's not just symbolic. It's a warning sign to anyone nearby that the institution will protect itself first. So where does that leave Sarah? If she can't lean on the palace, and she can't lean on Andrew without sinking with him, then she leans on the one asset she still controls. Her name, her story, her ability to turn chaos into a headline that pays. And that, I think, is the real plot people are sensing, not a cartoonish scheme, a brutal calculation. Because right now, the public sees an arrest, a looming investigation, and a family that's been here before. But behind the scenes, the more frightening question is simpler. How do you keep your lifestyle intact when the institution that once gave you a safety net is quietly tightening it, and the man you're tied to is legally radioactive? And if Sarah really is planning a comeback, then the most dangerous part won't be the criticism, it'll be the price of it. Because the public may forgive a lot, what it doesn't forgive is the sense that you learned nothing. So here's what stands out across all of this. Different years, different scandals, but the same pressure points keep returning. Money, access, and the instinct to outrun humiliation instead of confronting it. Now I want to leave you with two questions, because this next phase depends on which answer is true. Do you think Sarah Ferguson is genuinely trying to put distance between herself and Andrew to protect what's left of her life? Or is this simply a temporary repositioning until the investigation cools down and she can step back into the Windsor orbit like nothing happened? And if the palace has already decided the York chapter is a permanent problem, how long before quietly under investigation becomes the kind of headline nobody can smooth over? If you want, I can also do a follow-up connecting this to other royal exile by real estate stories where the house wasn't a home, it was a message. And if you're new here, subscribe for more royal deep dives that separate the loud headlines from the quiet maneuvers.